Welcome back, everybody. Today, we're going to be diving into a period of history that always makes me think of like a movie montage with a banjo soundtrack. The California Gold Rush.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
But I know your research goes way deeper than the typical, 49ers and Sutter's Mill stuff.
Right.
I'm ready to get my assumptions blown apart.
You are absolutely in for a treat. See, a lot of people focus on like 1848 as like the beginning of the whole thing.
Right.
But it's more complicated than that. Like, did you know that the gold was actually found in California 6 years before?
Really? So all that gold in them Thar Hills stuff,
Yeah.
It was already there, just nobody was paying attention.
Pretty much. It's a funny story, actually. In 1842, this guy, Francisco Lopez,
Okay.
he finds gold near Los Angeles.
Yeah.
But at that point, California was still under Mexican rule. It was kind of in this weird transition period to becoming part of America.
Right.
News didn't really travel that fast back then.
Yeah.
And honestly, gold wasn't like the automatic game changer it would become later on.
I guess it makes you wonder, what if that discovery had set off the same kind of frenzy? Would history have been totally different?
It's a great what if, right? Like maybe the timing just wasn't right. It was like California had to be in just the right spot for all that chaos.
Like primed for the chaos.
Yeah, exactly. So by 1848, you've got this Wild West vibe, a land that feels up for grabs,
Right.
Then James Marshall stumbles on gold at Sutter's Mill, and boom, the world kind of loses its mind.
And of course, the irony is that John Sutter himself ends up totally screwed over
Oh, yeah.
by the very gold that was on his land. Talk about insult to injury.
It's the ultimate tale of unintended consequences. His workers ditch him. People are squatting on his land. He can't control any of it.
Wild.
It just shows how even the people who seem like they should be winning the most can get swept up in these massive forces.
It's kind of a sobering thought, actually. So, okay. We've got the gold confirmed. The word is getting out.
Mm-hmm.
How does the news spread so fast
Yeah.
and create this total mass hysteria?
So this guy enters the picture, Samuel Brannan.
Okay. Super savvy businessman. Yep. Total knack for marketing.
I like where this is going.
He buys up every single prospecting supply he can find. And then, you want to know what he does?
Wow.
He walks through San Francisco yelling, "Gold! Gold! Gold from the American River!"
Oh, knowing what we know about marketing now, that's like the first viral gold rush campaign.
He knew exactly how to create a frenzy, and boy, did people come running from everywhere.
I bet. So San Francisco goes from this sleepy little outpost to this massive boom town pretty much overnight.
Pretty much overnight.
I'm picturing like ships just crammed into the harbor, people pouring off of them. Just a crazy mix of people all chasing that same dream.
Oh, yeah, it was crazy. And, it wasn't just lone prospectors. There were families, too.
Oh, really?
Yeah, women and children. They were working claims right alongside the men.
Interesting.
And you had all these boarding houses popping up all over the place.
Makes sense.
Often run by women, too, which is interesting. It kind of provided this sense of community in the middle of all the chaos. That's a detail you don't always hear about. It wasn't just about, individual fortune seekers,
Exactly.
It was about people trying to build some kind of life, some kind of community in this totally crazy new environment.
It's wild to think about. And here's the really interesting part. In those early days, there weren't really any rules.
Wait, so how do people even claim land?
Yeah.
If you find a spot, how do you say, "This is mine"?
Right. It really was the Wild West. You had claim-jumping people fighting over land. They kind of borrowed some rules from old Mexican mining laws, but there wasn't really any enforcement.
So even if you did strike it rich, it sounds like you had to fight to hold on to it. It wasn't just about finding the gold. It was about surviving this world with basically no law.
That's the reality. And that lack of rules had huge consequences, especially for the indigenous people of California.
Yeah.
But before we go there, let's talk about the journeys these people took to get to California in the first place.
Okay, yeah. Let's talk about those journeys.
Because, wow.
The perils.
Ah.
And I guess in some ways the promises of getting to California.
Right.
So last time we were talking about that Wild West atmosphere. No rules.
Yeah.
Anything goes.
Yeah.
Made me think about those insane journeys people took to even get to California.
Right.
And I can't even imagine
Man, it was brutal.
what that must have been like.
It was a real test, of human endurance and in some ways a reflection of the social divides of the time.
How so?
Well, think about it. Months at sea, cramped conditions, disease running rampant. Or you could go overland across a whole continent facing harsh weather, the unknown, constant danger.
Knowing how much you love the nitty-gritty details, I bet you have some sources that really paint a picture of these journeys.
Oh, I do. And these stories often get overlooked. Like, take the sea routes. There were a few different options.
Okay.
You could go around Cape Horn, which was long and dangerous.
Yeah.
Or across the Isthmus of Panama, which meant a trek through the jungle.
Yeah.
And that came with a whole lot of disease.
Yikes.
There was even a route that went up the Atlantic coast and across Nicaragua.
So even just choosing your route was a life or death decision.
Yeah, pretty much. Or at least it determined how much you were going to suffer.
Right.
It was not a trip for the faint of heart, let me tell you.
That's it.
And the cost varied wildly, too, which just highlights the class differences, The wealthy folks, they could afford, faster, more comfortable passages. But if you didn't have a lot of money, you were crammed into steerage. Longer journey, way harsher conditions.
It's like that saying, you get what you pay for, takes on a whole new meaning.
Oh, yeah.
When we're talking about a voyage that could last for months.
Exactly. And on some ships, they even had segregated areas based on what you paid. It just shows you that even in this crazy gold rush,
right,
those social hierarchies were still in place.
Yeah.
Crazy, right.
It really makes you think about those pictures of the abandoned ships in San Francisco Bay,
Oh, yeah.
Knowing that the crews just up and left to go find their fortune.
It's such a striking image, isn't it? Hundreds of ships just left to rot, crews vanished. It's like a maritime ghost town. Some of them were even repurposed, though. Yeah, they'd set up shops and businesses right there in the old ship hulls.
That's pretty resourceful.
It says a lot about the ingenuity and the desperation of the time.
So, okay, let's talk about the actual mining for gold.
Okay.
We've talked about how the methods evolved, but I'm curious about the day-to-day reality. Like, what did those early miners actually do?
Well, it started with the simplest method, panning.
Right.
Imagine standing in a freezing cold river, sifting through gravel and sand all day long.
Oh, my gosh.
Hoping to catch a glimpse of gold.
That sounds brutal.
Backbreaking work, but that potential reward, that kept them going.
It sounds like a whole lot of luck and a whole lot of sore muscles.
Exactly.
But it didn't stay that simple for long, right?
Right. As the easy gold started to disappear, the miners had to get more creative.
Makes sense.
So they came up with things like coyoteing, digging these shafts and tunnels following veins of gold deep underground.
That sounds dangerous.
Super dangerous. Lots of collapses, accidents.
Yeah.
Then there was sluicing, diverting whole rivers to expose the gold-bearing gravel. That took a lot of collaboration and ingenuity.
Wow.
It's amazing how fast they adapted and innovated, driven by that gold fever.
But I'm guessing those methods weren't so great for the environment?
You are right about that. The environmental impact was huge,
Yeah.
especially when they developed hydraulic mining.
Okay, I've heard of that.
Imagine blasting away entire hillsides
Whoa.
with high-pressure water cannons, washing tons of earth into rivers and valleys.
That's got to be a mark.
It reshaped the landscape in a dramatic way. And that damage wasn't limited to the physical environment.
Right.
It had a devastating impact on the indigenous population, too.
Yeah. It's a side of the gold rush that we can't forget about.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about what happened to the Native Americans during this time?
It's a tragic story. Their populations plummeted from over 150,000 to less than 20,000 in just a few decades.
Oh, my gosh.
They were driven from their ancestral lands, and those who resisted, they faced brutal violence.
It's hard to fathom that kind of suffering. And it wasn't just violence, right?
No, there were discriminatory laws passed, too, further marginalizing them, like the Act for the Government and Protection of Indians passed in 1850.
That sounds pretty ironic.
It is. It was anything but protection. It legalized the taking of native lands and allowed for their indentured servitude.
Wow.
And even those meager protections weren't really enforced. The California government was actively involved in the dispossession and extermination of Native Americans.
It's a dark chapter in California's history, one that we absolutely shouldn't forget.
Yeah.
But let's shift gears for a second and talk about the economics of the gold rush.
Okay.
Who actually profited from all this gold? Was it really those 49ers who struck it rich?
That's where the myth of the gold rush really falls apart. While some individuals did find fortunes, the reality is a lot more complicated.
How so?
About half of the people who went looking for gold, they only made modest profits. And a lot of them actually lost money.
Wait, so half the people lost money? That really goes against the whole get-rich-quick narrative.
Mm-hmm. It does. So if it wasn't the miners who were the real winners.
Yeah, who made the real money?
The merchants. The ones selling goods and services to all those prospectors.
Makes sense.
They were the ones raking it in, like Samuel Brannan, the guy who started the whole frenzy. He became one of the wealthiest men in California.
It all comes back to marketing, doesn't it?
It does.
He creates the demand, then he supplies the tools to meet it. Pretty brilliant.
Right. And there are some other names that might surprise you, like Levi Strauss.
With the jeans guy?
Yep, that Levi Strauss.
Yeah.
He started out selling these durable denim overalls to the miners and, well, met, the rest.
It's crazy how one event can launch empires, both expected and unexpected.
It really is. But speaking of unexpected, the gold rush's impact wasn't limited to California.
Oh, yeah.
It had ripple effects across the entire globe.
Wow. In what way?
Think about it. California suddenly needed a massive influx of food supplies goods. This created booming markets for farmers and chili manufacturers in Britain. Even prefabricated housing was shipped all the way from China.
So it was like this global chain reaction.
It was.
All set off by the discovery of gold. I bet that messed with prices everywhere. Was that ultimately good or bad for those economies?
That's a tough question. In a lot of ways, it was positive. Increased demand led to higher prices, stimulated economies.
Right.
It even sparked secondary gold rushes, like in Australia, when prospectors saw the similarities in the geology and thought, hey, we can find gold here too.
Wow. So the California gold rush wasn't just a local event. It reshaped economies on a global scale.
Exactly. And it had huge effects on the development of California itself. Remember, California wasn't even a state yet.
That's right. So how did all these people and all this wealth affect its path to statehood?
It was like a crash course in nation building.
I bet.
Towns needed governments, businesses needed regulation, people needed representation.
Right.
The gold rush forced them to create a state constitution, hold elections, formally petition for statehood.
Like California had to grow up really fast.
Exactly. And that rapid development had lasting effects. Think about all the infrastructure that had to be built. Roads, schools, churches, civic organizations, all to handle this exploding population.
That's amazing.
And then there's the Transcontinental Railroad, built in part because of the wealth from the gold rush,
Right.
connecting California to the rest of the U.S.
So the gold rush basically launched California into the modern era.
It did. It's incredible to think about how one single event could have such far-reaching consequences.
It really is. But in the middle of all that development, there were some interesting social and cultural changes happening too. For example, did you know the gold rush had a big impact on gender roles? Ooh, tell me more about that.
Yeah.
So last time we were talking about how the gold rush kind of forced California to grow up in a hurry.
Yeah, it really did.
It's amazing how one event could have such huge social and economic impacts.
It is. And those impacts weren't just limited to, economics and infrastructure.
Right.
It had a surprising effect on gender roles, too.
Okay, now I'm curious. How did a bunch of gold-crazy prospectors change gender dynamics?
Well, you got to remember, the vast majority of the people who came to California were men.
Yeah, good point.
So you had this super skewed gender ratio, which led to some interesting social adaptations.
No, I bet.
And even challenges to traditional norms.
So it was like a Wild West mentality, but with a gender twist.
Exactly. There are accounts of cross-dressing, especially at social events.
Really?
Yeah, because women were so scarce. A simple piece of cloth could signify someone taking on a female role.
That's fascinating. So in a way, the gold rush forced people to rethink traditional gender roles.
Out of necessity.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even the most deeply ingrained social norms can change when circumstances demand it. And you know what's interesting?
Right.
These shifts actually played a role in shaping San Francisco's early queer community.
Wow. So we're talking about really long-lasting impacts here.
Exactly. It adds a whole other layer of complexity to the city's history. But, let's not forget about the more obvious legacies of the gold rush.
Right, how it shaped California's image.
Yeah. It's hard to think about California without picturing those 49ers and mountains of gold.
It's become part of the state's identity. The nickname, the Golden State, that's a direct reference to the gold rush.
Of course.
You see it everywhere. License plates, tourism campaigns. It's inescapable.
And I'm sure you have some sources that go deeper than just the nickname, right?
Oh, yeah, tons. Think about some of the state symbols. The motto, Eureka, that's Greek for I have found it.
Right.
A direct nod to the gold discovery. Even the official state highway marker is shaped like a miner's spade.
Wow, it's like these constant visual reminders of that era.
They are. And what about the physical landscape itself? The gold rush left its mark there, too.
And in what way?
Well, take State Route 49, for example.
Okay.
It winds through the Sierra Nevada foothills, connecting all these old gold rush towns.
Like which ones?
Placerville, Auburn, Grass Valley. It's like driving through a history book. That's so cool. You can practically hear the echoes of those boon towns.
Yeah.
The saloons, the fortunes being made and lost. Did any of those towns actually survive?
Some did. And they offer a glimpse into the past, like Columbia State Historic Park.
I've heard of that.
They've preserved a lot of the original buildings. You can walk down the street and imagine it all coming back to life.
It's amazing how these places can transport you back in time.
It really is. But the legacy of the gold rush goes beyond just physical reminders. Think about its impact on literature and pop culture.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like Mark Twain, Bret Hart, Joaquin Miller, they all drew inspiration from the gold rush.
Exactly. They captured the spirit, the characters, the triumphs and tragedies, like Twain's The Celebrated Jumping Frog of Calaveras County. A classic.
Classic. And even today, the gold rush keeps inspiring books, movies, video games. It's become a part of American mythology.
It has. That story of adventure fortune, the lure of the unknown, it's timeless, and don't forget about sports.
Oh, right. The San Francisco 49ers.
Named after those gold rush pioneers. A constant reminder every season.
But beyond the tangible, beyond the cultural face, the gold rush also left behind something a little harder to define, the California dream.
Ah, yes. That idea that anyone can make it in California with some hard work and a bit of luck.
Is that dream still alive, though? Or is it just a relic of the past?
That's the question, isn't it? The gold rush itself might be over, but the idea it created that persists. Generations have come to California searching for their own version of success.
Right, whether it's Silicon Valley or Hollywood.
Exactly. So in a way, the gold rush planted the seed for California's future. As this land of innovation and reinvention, it's a powerful idea, even if the reality is a lot more complicated.
It really is. And it makes you think, what are the gold rushes of today? What's happening right now that will have these same huge impacts on the future?
That's a great question. What forces are shaping our world that will leave their mark on tomorrow? What stories will we tell? What legacies will we create?
I think that's the perfect place to wrap up our deep dive today. Thanks for joining me on this journey. And until next time, keep exploring.